the lines. Now, you have been telling me all the way through this book that the lines are not the most important thing. But now you are devoting a whole section to them. Well, did I ever say that they were unimportant? Besides, I retain the right to be inconsistent. Lines can be your best friend, or your worst enemy. It all depends on how lazy you are. For those who are blessed with photographic memories, lines may be easy to memorize. For the rest of us, some work is involved. I am not going into a great deal of detail about memorization, but I will hit the high points and give you a few tips. After that, I will show you how to tailor-make your basic personality and relationships, everything that depends on your prior history and your internal structure, while you learn your lines. Memorizing. Every actor has lines to learn. It comes with the territory. You learn them and get it over with. But frankly, learning lines is the most boring thing in the world, at least for me it is. Still, they need to be done, and there is no getting around it. I will start with some tips that will help you with the process. First, don't ever use line readings. Learn the lines by rote. Stone cold, and without any feeling at all. Why? Because, if you sit there at home and do the kind of line readings that you were taught in speech class, you are going to put a particular way of saying a line into your subconscious. I guarantee that exact reading will come out on stage, or in front of the camera, and cause you no end of trouble. Well, what's wrong with that? Plenty. First off, since the performance that you give depends on the effect that the other people in the story have on you, don't you think that it is a little silly to program your lines to be said in a particular way when it is necessary for you to keep them free so that they will fit the moment? Make no mistake about this, everything that you do to learn your lines is actually programming the subconscious. The subconscious is where you store your lines, and if you put them in there, in a particular way, they will come out that same way. So learn them cold, and without a particular spin to them that line readings give you. Second, don't hold the script in your hands. This may seem like a silly thing to say, but holding the script in your hands makes it that much harder for you to get to the point where you don't need that script. It is part of that subconscious programming. If you hold the script, you will tend to become dependent on the physical presence of the script in your hand as your anchor for the lines. Set the script on a table or a music stand, and only look at it to get the line. Closing your eyes and looking up into your mind falls into this category too. Eyes open and focused on the world you're in is the best way to learn the lines, so that they serve you best. Third, move around while you go over the lines, be active. You have all heard the story about the director that fires an actor because the actor can't walk and talk at the same time. I don't know that it has ever really happened, but it illustrates the problems caused when you don't move while learning lines. Movement adds another layer of effort to the performance. Be prepared for this effort by moving about when you memorize. The second reason that you move around is that it keeps your energy up, your heart pumping, and your boredom level from climbing too high. Fourth, give your mind and your voice a rest. There is a lot more physical work to learning lines than most people realize. Even actors who have been doing it for a long while will sometimes try to force their mind to go further than it can at any one time. Forcing your mind to operate when it is tired only builds resistance to the very thing that you are trying to do. And actors have been overworking their voices for ages. Your vocal tract is actually very delicate and can't take a lot of abuse. Work on the lines for a while, and then take a mental and vocal break. Then go back to working the lines. It also helps a lot to have water handy to sip on. Fifth, build up the lines over a period of time. This works the same way as trying to force the mind to remember. It turns out that regular effort over a period of time brings better results than a hurried effort at the last minute. The old tortoise and hare story applies here, as well as most everywhere. So keep it in mind, and work every day with a steady-paced effort, and I think that you will see better results. Sixth, break the speeches up into small sections. The process works better if you don't try to bite off too big of a hunk. First, It is just plain easier to remember one sentence at any one moment than it is to remember 3. Second, if you use short sentences, it is easier for you to breathe. You should train yourself into the habit of breathing deeply and often. Also, if you learn using short sections, you can insert a gist phrase, which is a technique, before each line to help you learn the character. I will talk about gist phrases in a little bit. 7th, work the lines just before you go to bed. One of the never-ending wonders of the human mind is the little understood process by which sleep affects our memory. But take it as a given that when you study lines just before you go to sleep, you learn them more quickly and more solidly. However, don't take this as an absolute. There are people that I know that learn their lines best early in the morning. Trust yourself, and don't force yourself into an arbitrary schedule when your body is telling you something else. Remember, you are trying to get your mind's cooperation, not trying to force it into submission. 8th, use a clear and somewhat louder voice than your normal speaking voice. Most people mumble when they learn their lines. That is an awful habit to get into, especially if you're working on the stage. Remember, the way you learn your lines is the way you will perform them. One of the most persistent faults that actors have is not speaking up. It is easy to understand when you realize that most actors spend a great deal of time practicing mumbling. So spend a fair amount of time practicing at the volume that you are going to be using when you perform. Volume for the stage needs to be bigger so that you overcome the absorption of sound that all those people create when they sit there. You also need to overcome the bad acoustics of some theaters as well as other sounds that filter in when there isn't sufficient soundproofing. All this means that what sounds all right at home will be too soft for the stage, and if you mumble at home, no one will hear you when you perform. 9th, learn the lines well enough that you can remember them at the height of the feeling. I have seen otherwise excellent actors flounder in the middle of a scene because they start to really feel something. That is what you want, but it takes extra concentration, and if the lines aren't memorized deeply enough, there is where you can lose them. The better you know the lines, the easier it is to keep your concentration in moments of extreme passion. There is nothing so unprofessional as an actor who does not know their lines well enough. There is also one thing that you can always do to make it easier to perform your part: study your lines. 10th, don't spend too much time on any one line. There is a tendency to try to get one line down pat before moving on to the next, going over and over and over and over the line. Well, besides being boring as hell, it doesn't really help you learn the line faster. Also, it puts into your work the habit of not moving on to the next line in a timely way. Say the line 3 or 4 times, and then move on to the next line. Build up the lines in your memory over a period of time as layers along the same track. That way, you will have the sense that it is all right to freely move on to the next line and keep the flow going. 11th, don't perform your lines at home. Line learning is rehearsal. When you perform, you start at the beginning, and you say each line only once, in sequence, going through the whole piece to the end. You should never do this while learning your lines. Why? Because performing at home without another person there to react off of is performing in a void. It will make you think that what you are doing is responsive, when it is actually training you to focus your attention only on yourself, be less responsive. That is a good way to deaden your performance. So, when you are at home learning lines, make a clear separation in your mind from performance. One of the best ways to do this is to never say any line less than 3 times. Even when you get to the point where you really know them well, say them only 3 times and move on. Remember, this is memorization, not performance or rehearsal. Here's an additional tip you can sometimes use. First, number each speech and use that number before each line of that speech. This can be especially helpful if you are dyslexic, like me. Part of dyslexia is an inability to recognize sequential order. Numbering your speeches and memorizing the number, along with the line, can help with this problem. But every actor can be helped by this. There is a part of the mind that likes to order things, count things, and generally put things into neat boxes. If you ignore this part of your mind, it can start demanding attention and become quite stubborn when it can't perform its function. For most people, simply counting lines will satisfy it. But this part of the mind can be a help as well as a hindrance. Numbering your lines and using the numbers to stay in order can use this part of the mind to support your performance in a way that can be very helpful, especially if you are doing a role where you have a lot of emotion. Also, you don't actually need to say the numbers, but knowing them helps. Next, don't learn the other person's lines, or even the cues. This may be the hardest of the line learning things to go along with. Indeed, there are some exceptions to this, but for the most part, if you learn the other person's lines, you end up not listening to the other person. You also end up ignoring the events and the other person's behavior. Why? Because you know everything that is going to be happening before it happens. This can cause you to check out while the other person is speaking. In this school of acting, paying attention to the other person is of the utmost importance. Anything that you do that keeps you from doing that should be dropped from your rehearsal routine. In film work, you often don't get a lot of time to rehearse with the other actors. So you don't get the sense of where your line fits, like you would rehearsing for a stage show. If you're working on the film for a day or two, you may find that the only way to give a competent performance is to learn the cues and the other person's lines. But even here, where the working conditions make it necessary, it should be avoided as much as you can. It would be better for you to work with a friend at home and do line rehearsals to get the sense of the timing, rather than learning the other lines and cues. Remember that what you do in rehearsal goes directly to your subconscious, and then comes directly out again, the same way. Garbage in, garbage out. Well, that's all I have to say on line learning itself, so I am going to introduce you to a handy little tool, the gist phrase. The gist phrase exercise. In acting, there is a term called the active meaning. This term is related to the subtext, or the behavioral text, of the scene or the whole story. It is the 98% of the iceberg that exists underneath the tip, the words. This active meaning is the emotional subconsciousness of the story. It's all the stuff that we have been working so diligently to understand and reproduce. It is made up of all the attitudes and drives of all of the people in the story, and quite frankly, it is what the audience comes to see. Really good writers know this, and make their stories about the subtext completely. Bad writers focus on the words alone. It is this overall subtext that is the source of the moment-to-moment work. And this subtext generates gist phrases. So what is this gist phrase? Simply put, it is a simple short sentence that states a person's subtext at any particular moment. Let's go back to the example of our obnoxious nephew and the offended shin. You have said ouch, and your impulse is to haul off and whack the kid, but since, for various reasons, this is frowned upon, you don't. You could have any number of gist phrases here, but the most obvious would be something like, I really want to whack you one. It doesn't matter that the kid is 9, your feelings are still the same. The gist phrase is the statement that you would make if you weren't so civilized. It is a direct expression of the subtext. It is what you say under your breath to someone that you don't like, but for various reasons don't want to confront. It is what you say to yourself about the other person's actions that for any reason you don't voice. It is a direct expression of your feelings. It is a direct expression of your desires. Or, it is a direct expression of your emotions. It is a summation of everything that is happening inside you at that moment that you don't express with the words that you speak. It's your subtext. Let me give you another example. You are at a party, and Betty comes up to you and compliments you on how nice you look in last fall's fashions. How's that again? Last fall. You say to Betty, why thank you, when you know she is being a bitch. The gist phrase is the sum of your reactions put into words, and is your real feelings in that moment. Let's go back to the emotional bridge for a moment. There are 5 basic parts to your total character, and a couple of parts to your circumstance. They are the event, your basic personality, your feelings, your desires, the relationships, the actions, and the prior circumstances. When you are constructing your character, you should address yourself to each of these areas, for each of the scenes. For that matter, address yourself to anything important that you need to have a point of view about. You should do daydreams about your relationships and presets about the things that you have to react to. Given enough time, that is what you should do. And the more important the role, the more that this is necessary for success. But what if you don't have 10 weeks to prepare and rehearse? What if you only have 3 or 1? What if you have to fly from the film that you are doing today in mainland Australia to Morocco to start another film? What if you are called in at the last moment and barely have time to learn the lines before you start shooting? In that case, you need a shorthand way of learning both the lines and the character's inner life at the same time. Tall order, isn't it? And this is where the gist phrase comes into the picture. Here is the gist phrase exercise. You make up a gist phrase, pulling the phrase from the basic parts of the emotional bridge for each scene as you learn it. Don't go crazy about this, and you needn't limit yourself to these 7. Start with the most important, and make them up only as you need them. Then, while you are learning the lines, you insert your gist phrase in front of every line as you learn it. Your feelings, or your desires, are usually a good place to start. But don't ignore the others. There are 3 rules. First rule is, you say your gist phrase like you really meant it. Then use the emotional tone the gist phrase gives you to say the actual line. The subconscious is like an eager first grader. It wants to help. If you really put the energy into your gist phrase, it will hop on the bandwagon and start to do the things that the phrase suggests. So, if you pour your heart into the attitude of the gist phrase, then it will go with that attitude later, when you need it. Also, remember that the gist phrase isn't the literal meaning, it is your underlying feelings given voice. You are practicing having these feelings. To do this at all, you have to allow these feelings to happen. You say the text line exactly the same way as the gist phrase, no matter what the line is. You can't say the gist phrase one way and the text line another. The reason for this is that you want to give the sense and the feeling of the gist phrase to the line, not the other way around. You are not illustrating the definition of the words, but practicing your point of view or your deepest feelings. By changing the way you say the 2 things, you undercut the good of the exercise. Also, this exercise helps train you to let your gut behavior drive the line, rather than your brain. You use the same gist phrase for each line of the scene that you are learning, and only when you start over do you use another gist phrase. The reason for this is that you want to train your subconscious to have a certain feeling or attitude as a part of your basic personality. The best way to do this is to keep insisting that this is the feeling that you want. Your subconscious will get the picture, but it gets the picture through repetition. So keep at it until you have gone all the way through the section of lines that you are working on before you change the phrase to another phrase. Here's an example of how it might go. Your text line is, I saw you walking and thought that you might like some company. Let's say you decide that you want to start building your character by working on your relationship to this person. You pick a gist phrase that expresses your relationship at this moment. Let's say that your relationship is one of really serious attraction. You could use the gist phrase, I'm deeply attracted to you. Your line learning session would sound something like this. I'm deeply attracted to you. I saw you walking. I'm deeply attracted to you. I saw you walking. I'm deeply attracted to you. I saw you walking. I'm deeply attracted to you. And thought that you might like some company. I'm deeply attracted to you. And thought that you might like some company. I'm deeply attracted to you. And thought that you might like some company. And so on throughout the scene. The gist phrase would then be used to cement into your subconscious the fact that you are deeply attracted to this person at this point in the story, which is a subtext statement of your attitude at this moment in the relationship. You can use a gist phrase for more than one scene if it applies to a more general aspect of your character, which is a way to keep the process from getting out of hand and wasting valuable time. Also, don't use the same gist phrase for more than one run-through. Do that run-through, then use a different gist phrase with a different emotional focus. People rarely have just a single emotional need, so use different gist phrases for each run-through. The more you use different gist phrases, the deeper the depth of the person will be. Remember that what you are training here is your subconscious. You are training it to the true feelings of the person that you are portraying. Your orientation should always be towards the subconscious and the behavior, not toward the literal meaning of the line. Lines ride the behavior, like someone rides a horse in a race. The line provides the direction, but the line should have no choice but to go with the subconscious, the brute emotional force that will get you there. Well, that's it. That's the gist phrase exercise. One thing that you will notice if you use this exercise a lot is that gist phrases will go stale on you after a little while. This is actually a very good sign. It means that your subconscious has accepted the phrase and linked it to the scene and is waiting for new information. The easiest thing to do here is to change the gist phrase to another of the primary areas. Also, sometimes the gist phrase will mutate into something else while you are working with it. Unless this happens too much, you should let it happen. Your subconscious is like that really helpful child I spoke of earlier. You don't want to indulge it, but you shouldn't ignore it either. It wants to help, and after you get the hang of this, it will see things that it wants to let you know about. Let it. It might be the very thing you need to make this moment come alive. So, modify the gist phrase whenever you need to. Gist phrases are not written in stone, and sometimes the one you pick will not express the feelings that you are going through and need to be changed. Also, as you get deeper into the character, you find that your earlier phrases need to change to suit the new insight that working on the character will give you. The last bit of advice is that you should take it slow at first until you get the hang of it. Also learn the lines wrote for the first couple of times through, so you get used to saying them physically. Then when you add the gist phrase, it will be easier. Well, the actor land tour will now move to the less intellectual parts of this art form. Please follow me onwards. Thanks for watching.